I got involved with the Muslim Journal as a member of the early Nation of Islam transition from Elijah Muhammad's organization to Imam W.D. Muhammad's leadership. And at that time, we were coming from the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which was started by Malcolm. Um, People know Malcolm by a lot of things, but I don't know if everybody remember that he was a newspaper man. He was a media man.
Welcome to Profound Conversations, a dynamic broadcast platform focused on building healthy communities. In an ever-evolving world, new ideas and transformative ways of being are the lights at the end of the tunnel.
Imagine you're in a car with your spouse. You pull up to a light in the mid-1960s, a Black couple. And in front of you at this light, the couple walking in front across the street stops. Then more people show up. Then all of a sudden they're behind you, they're on your sides. Quickly, this turns violent as you're yanked out of the car and beaten in the street to the point of almost death, until later on, a Black cab driver has the gumption to pick you up and take you to the local hospital, where you are denied care until you walk for yourself into the hospital with your guts hanging out. And then you collapse. This is a story that I only read in one newspaper, the Muslim Journal, in the mid-1960s. It wasn't in the Herald, it wasn't in the Boston Globe. But this Boston story is one that youth need to know, not only in Massachusetts, but across the country. Today, I have two journalists that inherited the dynasties of Black newspapers. And collectively, with over 60 years experience between them and over 100 years of experience in their papers, have been able to tell stories just like this to audiences that wouldn't know not only the information, but how to prepare themselves in a climate that was very unjust. And today, with all the trials and tribulations that are happening, with the American experiment breaking down once again and being challenged, their civil rights-based papers looks at the Black community again and shares information that is challenged in other public square spaces. Welcome, Aisha Mustafa of the Muslim Journal and Denise Rolock Barnes of the Washington Informer. Ladies, welcome to our show of Profound Conversations.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. That was quite an opening.
Well, I'm sure the Washington Informer also has stories similar to this that only you have told. And we want to dive into what the role of your papers have been, how you got involved, and how how your papers collectively have morphed over the years. Aisha Mustafa, I'm going to start off with you because that article came out of Muhammad Speaks newspaper, the predecessor to the Muslim Journal, in which you are now the editor-in-chief. So can you share with us how you got involved with the Muslim Journal and where is it going?
Well, thank you for having me again. And it's quite an honor to be on the show with your esteemed guests. And the history collectively that's withheld within those pages of the Washington Informer. I got involved with the Muslim Journal as a member of the early Nation of Islam transition from Elijah Muhammad's organization to Imam W.D. Muhammad's leadership. And at that time, we were coming from the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which was started by Malcolm. People know Malcolm by a lot of things, but I don't know if everybody remember that he was a newspaper man. He was a media man. And even before he started the Muhammad Speaks, he would advocate for Black newspapers. And some of those incidents that you read on the pages of Muhammad Speaks, that was the things that inspired Malcolm to promote and support black newspapers. And he would say, I don't care which one you buy, but buy a black newspaper. And he called mainstream media the big guns downtown. He said, when they turn their big guns on you, who's going to be come to your defense? And he said, the black newspapers should be the ones that come to your defense. And then he would say, in terms of purchasing newspapers and supporting newspapers, you need to keep your media well oiled and ready. That's the language that he used. Keep your media well oiled and ready so that they can come to your defense. He said, because when the big guns, and that's what he called mainstream media, when they turn on you, you need a response. You need someone to respond on your behalf. And that was the origin of the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. And over the years, up until 1975, that focus was indeed to be a visual for the African American community and the event community. And it still is. We have transitioned over the years from Muhammad Speaks into Muslim Journal newspaper under the leadership of the late Imam David Dean Muhammad. And we've added a little bit more religion to the pages in terms of what Al-Islam brings to our message, into our leadership, into our vision. So that's where we have began to direct ourselves into reincorporating Al-Islam into the pages of our newspaper.
You have a background that comes from Mississippi, and I want to get into that. But you talk about Malcolm X, and the first thing I think about is actually the title of our show today, which is Guardians of the Narrative, the Fate and Future of Black-Owned Media. Your background from Mississippi, you're actually an inheritor yourself, along with Denise Rolock Barnes. Your brother, Socrates Garrett, was also the head of the Mississippi Link newspaper.
Yes, that's right. He was actually the founder of the Mississippi Link, and his partner, Jackie Hampton, whom the NNPA members know. Jackie Hampton eventually was given ownership of the paper. It transcended to her in their partnership. So, but Socrates Garrett actually started the Mississippi Link.
Awesome. I'm going to go and shift gears to Denise Rolock Barnes. You are also an inheritor. This actually from your father. Can you talk about the lineage of a Black newspaper, that level of inheritance, and how you got on board and what that meant in transition to the paper? Your mic is off.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you this evening, and it's quite an honor to be on with Sister Aisha as well. One of our former writers, Askia Muhammad, I think worked with the Muslim Journal and over the years, and it does my heart good to know that our publications are still. We may not be thriving, but we're surviving, and that's so important. The Washington Informer was founded by my father here in Washington, D.C. in 1964. He and my stepmother, she supported the same story that we hear so many of our publications, where someone loaned a publisher, $500 or $300, and they were able to get that first edition off, which was October 16, 1964. And, he maintained the publication for several years, but one of his mission at the time, so many people come to Washington from different places, as you know, and especially during the 60s and when, before we had home rule, before we had an elected city council or mayor, the city was run by the federal government, the president of the United States and the federal government, which, folks are trying to return us to that time now. But there were Black folks in the city, Marion Barry, my dad, a bunch of folks that came from really out of the South, who came to DC and didn't like the fact that Black folks couldn't vote. We couldn't even vote for president of the United States at that time. And so there was this movement, right, to make, I would think about a front page story my father ran in the paper at the time, that said, you know, DC run by suburban white folks or something like that, because a lot of the people that were running the city did not live in the city. They were not Black. And so, you know, it was during that period when folks came here, was, you know, Dr. King, the March on Washington, a whole lot was happening. And so there was this push to create some type of self-determination for the District of Columbia. And so when my father started the Informer, his goal was to help to organize the base in the city, to let folks know kind of the story of how the evolution of the city was taking place, or maybe I should say revolution was taking place, because, you know, there were people who were thinking about, you know, how do we get control? How do we, once we did, you know, getting people prepared to run for office, being prepared to serve in leadership positions, particularly in the local government. You know, right after Dr. King was assassinated and the city pretty much burned to the ground, and white folks left, Black folks were left here or stayed here to try to clean it all up. And so, you know, we needed, in his mind, we needed positive stories to talk about what folks were doing to contribute to the quality of life for Black people in the city. And so you know, those were the stories that he told, you know, what positive things folks were doing in education, how they were leading in communities, how they were fighting violence, how the church, the faith community was stepping up. A lot of our leaders were preachers. You know, we've always seen that. So it was a lot going on. And then he sort of stepped away because he created something called the United Black Fund, and which was a philanthropic organization that supported Black nonprofits, mostly Black and Hispanic nonprofits in the district. And I just happened to be a journalism major at the time. And so I stepped in, but I didn't really become the full publisher of the Informer until my dad passed in 1994. So, you know, it's interesting how I've seen history repeat itself, how I've seen, you know, the struggles that Black folks have had in the city. And I would have never thought we'd be at the point where we are right now, where there's an administration that thinks it's okay to take over the control of the city that, again, the Black folks helped to build. So here we are.
Having had those kinds of experiences, and because you have navigated these waters, you said surviving, perhaps at times doing better than other times, how do you sustain an authentic storytelling for the Black voice?
It's not hard. I mean, that's what we are, and that's what we do. You know, we are the link to the Black community. We are in the community. You know, we live in the community. Our office folks can walk into our building anytime they want to and share stories about us, tell about themselves, what's going on in their neighborhood. So I don't think there's no challenge, I think, in maintaining our authenticity. I think at a time when we were, you know, beginning or striving to get the advertising that we need to support our print publications, we may have thought that there was, you know, something that might determine the kinds of stories that we told, but it didn't. You know, it didn't. Advertising was one thing. Our editorial was something separate. And so, you know, our focus has always been on the Black community. And it will continue to be that, because, as we say, who else is there to tell our story but us?
But today, you see within Washington, coming out of Washington, there's been such a shutdown of the truth in so many spaces, whether you're talking legally, you're talking about institutions that uphold justice, or you're talking about freedom of press. So is this a different landscape for you as Black media to be able to tell the truth, particularly when much of our history is actually being even erased at the Library of Congress?
Well, I would just like to say that it makes it even more important. It makes it even more critical. You know, it digs us in to make sure that we don't lose any more ground, because, you know, what we lose, the whole country lose. When you start infringing on the First Amendment and taking away those rights, then, you know, the whole country, the dynamics of the entire country has changed. If you don't have the First Amendment rights, you don't have a constitution, and therefore you don't have a government that we've all signed on to, have been born into. The whole landscape has changed. So those difficulties are there, but it makes it even more critical that we hold our ground and dig our heels in, and not let go of the legacies that have been passed on to us. And just as a Mississippian, I just want to give a shout out to our beloved sister, who she's known from Memphis, but she was born in Itabima, Mississippi, and that's Ida B. Wells.
Yes.
And you had no greater journalist, no greater devout servant to the press, because she knew that serving the press was to serve her people and to bring justice to difficult situations. So I lived in Chicago for 36 years, but I came home happily, because I say these are the grounds that gave birth to Ida B. Wells. And there's no greater journalist. You know, after 80 years after her passing, they finally gave her a Pulitzer Prize. And now if you Google, Mattel has a Ida B. Wells Barbie doll, which is kind of cute.
I would pull mine down because it's right behind me.
Oh, okay. Great.
Well, you know, I went to Hampton University, HBCU, and HBCUs have recently been under great attack as well. And at Hampton University, I remember coming into the space and them saying, our school's goal is to have 20% Caucasian in the school as part of their model for either sustainability and or attraction to become relevant in a bigger market. And so how much pressure do you have to not just tell the Black story, but to tell other stories and be relevant to a general press outside of the community?
So one of the things, and that has been my observation, is that Black newspapers and Black press, nobody knows what you're reading in your home, right? They might see you pick it up from the stand, but they don't know what you're reading. And sometimes we don't know who's consuming our news. And I'll just say that I went to Hampton as well, but I was at HI, transferred to HU. So I'm sorry I abandoned the university, but I went to the yeah. But if you, now that we've done this, digital transformation and our publications are online, right? And you can no longer get the racial breakdown. You can check your analytics, but they don't do it by race. So at one point we thought or had read or saw where there was a significant number of non-African Americans reading our publication online. And so I think that's the case for all of our publications. We don't know who's reading them. We have the numbers. We know, well, I won't say we don't know, but we know gender, we know age, we know income level, we know where the communities from which they come. Maybe we can kind of figure that out by zip code, but we don't know who's reading our publication. So if our focus is on the Black community and remains there, folks need to read it. We're not writing, we're writing for our community, and we're going to continue to do that. There is a story that I heard recently. Because that's what keeps our engines running is, of course, again, advertising, right? And now that we have gone into this anti-DEI period where, advertisers cannot or say they can't support us because, we used to come out of that DEI budget. And the Afro-American newspaper, which is based in Baltimore, as my understanding, was told by an advertiser, if we're going to continue to do business with us, you have to change your name. That was not going to happen, right? So we're not changing who we are or what we do or what we feel our role is. And we just, the chips have to fall where they may, but we feel as though, I think the biggest challenge for us right now is that people are turning off news. I don't care who they are. They don't want to hear what they think is all of this negative news. And so, we're trying to figure out, how do we hold on to folks to give them something that makes them feel good about themselves, as opposed to all of this news that has us all depressed and, wanting to turn away from it. So that's our challenge, I think, right now.
Well, I think that's interesting because I would ask Aisha Mustafa in particular, for the Muslim Journal, you do feature a lot of stories about family success, community success, and things like this on a regular basis. But how much of that becomes insular to a larger subscription? How do you hold on to that from a philanthropic model? Like, how does that sell papers?
Well, there are two tracks. We think about, when we start talking about desegregation, the pros and cons, and then we say, after we start chasing the desire to desegregate and to be one with everyone, we kind of lost our footing when it came to supporting ourselves. We kind of diluted our resources, or poured away our resources in chasing after being acceptable, as opposed to being builders of the Black communities, or the African American communities. And the early African American newspapers were for building Black communities, and that was the foundation. And then, the other stream is to be inclusive and to reach out, to expand our reader base, but to not lose ourselves. And the objective, there's a Muslim saying, we were nations and tribes so that you would come to know each other. And the objective is not for us to lose ourselves or to lose our own identity. And even going back to the slavery days, it was said that emancipation emancipated the slave owners as well. It emancipated white people as well, Caucasians as well, because the system was a captive to all of us. So we have all those dynamics within our newspapers and within our pages of how we view things. And it is not to shut anyone out, but our first obligation is to build our communities and to report to them what they need to hear. Going back to like the Chicago Defender and John Abbott, and John Senstack, and he sent his I didn't go to Hampton, but John Senstack sent his granddaughter to Hampton, so I know about Hampton through that newspaper. I did my thesis on the Chicago Defender. So we play both. We do both objectives. We have both objectives, but our primary objective is to our communities and to our constituents of African American descent, and what they need to rebuild. And I do mean rebuild.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing both of you as kind of like stalwart supporters of the fabric of the Black newspaper, but they're not the only Black newspapers. Certainly there have been voices that have been dissenting voices with Black face that have folded under the pressure, and not meaning closed out, but told a different narrative. I know my grandfather, for instance, was in Atlantic City. He was a judge in that space. And upon his passing, a story was told from a Black newspaper that had surfaced negative information about why he had passed. And when that happened, a number of people gathered in a square. They pulled out the newspaper. They burned 150 of the newspapers, and as a result of that, the newspaper went out of business. But that was an extreme reaction, and part of the narrative in the article that described this incident said, we're tired of some of these papers telling a negative narrative about our existence. And they were talking about Black newspapers as well. I've worked for media where I've gotten that call like you, Denise Barnes, where they said, we are challenged. We had a Black bank call and challenge a station that I was on, faith-based station, and said, we're unable to finance any kind of radio station that has Arabic on it. So I know these phone calls are happening. I know these pushes are happening. You're pushing back, but who's not?
Well, I mean, I wasn't there, and I don't know factually how this happened, but I think Dr. King faced the same thing early on in the civil rights movement. A lot of folks, ministers, the Black press, a lot of folks did not support him. We just celebrated the 30th or commemorated the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March. You know, there were a lot of community leaders who did not support that, you know, despite its success. And so, you know, we're not monolithic. You know, we have different opinions about different things. And if people don't like what we print or publish, you know, they have the right to react. That's fine. I hope they don't do like they did with a couple of the papers, you know, in South, like Ida B. Wells' paper, you know, where they throw fire bombs and, you know, try to burn the facilities down. Those things have happened before. Not that Black people did it, but, you know, that's one of the risks that we face. And it's sad, but it's true. And then we have, you know, we have politicians that we cover, and we may not like the legislation that they are passing, or the decisions that they're making that we think negatively impact our community. And we will get those phone calls. You know, we'll get reactions that people have that they think we're doing something negative. But I mean, to me, that's part of the business. I hate to say it is. If we want people to be able, this is America where you can have free speech, and it used to be, I don't know what it is now, but you know, you should be able to express yourself some way. But I think the important thing is to be factual. You know, now if we're publishing lies or misinformation, which is what we're dealing with, challenges that we're dealing with right now. A paper, if it's proven, right, they have a way to correct themselves, right? We should be able to do that. We should be able to set the record straight, as has happened forever. But if a paper refuses to do that, or a media company refuses to do that, then they're going to face the consequences. But the thing is, you know, as Aisha said earlier, we want to be truth tellers. And that's what's most important.
So let's talk about the landscape that you cover. I know I've read articles that are globally covered. Where is your audience? Are you covering the whole globe's experiences from the African diaspora? Where is your audience?
Who goes?
Because I think that's a good question. I mean, we are a local publication. That's what we strive to. We strive to tell the local stories. We're in DC, Prince George's County, Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, Northern Virginia. I mean, that's our circle right there. And we're trying to expand to Charles County, Maryland. So all of the stories that we write and publish and cover are focused on the DMV. Now, we do have international stories that we do from time to time, but we don't really have the resources or the writers to do that. Actually, I have a young intern right now who's amazing and doing some international pieces for us, but we don't have that. You know, if we looked at our analytics and try to figure out who outside of or in the diaspora who's reading our publications, it's not a lot. Most of them are local. Maybe with the Muslim Journal is a little different because you're a national publication. So
well,
here.
Well, Muslim Journal is also a member of the NNPA, the National Newspaper Publishers Association. African American newspapers, about 200 newspapers plus across the country, and each of those newspapers represent a different geographics. Primarily, though, addressing the issues and needs and events of African American newspapers. So we have that network that we all kind of circulate within. And and even share coverage, news coverage that can accommodate different areas. We have a writing pool from the NNPA where we share stories. Something from the Muslim Journal I think that might be more of interest of more African American newspapers. I can post it, and they are allowed to pick that up. The Muslim Journal itself, we are a national newspaper because we are an organization-oriented newspaper. We were born out of an organization, so our newspaper readers are national. We have about 85 cities that we have vendors in who take the paper weekly and sell as newspaper vendors. And then we have a circulation of subscribers. And we have a digital copy in most newspapers, practically all newspapers now also have a digital edition. When the print newspaper is printed, they also post that newspaper where it can be read online because that's where a lot of readers are. So we cater to the times and the innovations that are being made. However, we try to make sure that we don't lose ourselves with all the shining new lights and things that people rush after this brand new, because we feel that mainstay old time newspaper will be there still in the end when all the innovations and new things have been fleeting moments. Someone has to stay behind and tend the store while everybody else goes out to play.
Well, we want to thank both of you for coming on this episode of Profound Conversations called The Guardians of the Narrative, the Fate and Future of Black-Owned Media. And we're here again with Aisha Mustafa from the Muslim Journal and Denise Rolock Barnes from the Washington Informer. Thank you for being part of our show today.
Thank you so much. And I just would remind people, if they want to read the Washington Informer, go to WashingtonInformer.com, sign up, become a subscriber. Who knows? It may allow us to become national. I'm sure Aisha has a link for her website as well.
Thank you. It's muslimjournal.net. Thank you.
I'm Latifah Fields, your conversationalist, and this has been another episode of Profound Conversations.
Thank you for joining our Profound Conversation. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to our podcast and then gift this information to a friend or family member using the share button. You can find our show on all social media platforms as well as on our website at profoundconvos.com. Profound Conversations executive producers are the Muslim Life Planning Institute, a national community building organization whose mission is to establish pathways to lifelong learning and healthy communities at the local, national, and global level.